we're so far past this idea that we're going to talk our kids out of doing drugs. That's not to say that the things that we do as parents and as communities aren't preventative, because they are. But part of drug prevention is arming them with a sense of self-efficacy. And that's what neutral information does.
Before we speak with Erin Khar, author of Strung Out, One Last Hit, and Other Lies That Nearly Killed Me, we'd like to thank these supporters of Parents and Addicts in Need: Plan Solutions Incorporated, personalized solutions for your financial challenges, investment, tax planning, retirement, and more at plansolutions.com. Trauma Law California, Shannon Hesketh, personal injury and criminal defense lawyer, walking alongside clients through the traumas that land them in the legal system since 2017. TraumaLawCA.com.
Don't Hide the Scars, a weekly podcast focused on addiction and recovery. Created by the nonprofit PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, and founded by Flindt Andersen.
Erin Khar, the author of Strung Out, One Last Hit, and Other Lies That Nearly Killed Me. Thank you for joining founder of Parents and Addicts in Need, Flindt Andersen, and myself, Jason LaChance, on the Don't Hide the Scars podcast.
Nice to be here.
Thanks, Erin. Thanks for joining us again. We're really looking forward to this conversation. That's for sure.
Absolutely. So, you spoke with Flindt before and really touched on your book, which I have some questions for, because now I got to go and order it because I'm the reader. But you did this awesome article that Flindt and I, it was on a topic we were both fired up with, talking about Matthew Perry releasing his autobiography. And
right.
You said something in there that we were kind of fired up about. Not everybody has 9 million to devote to recovery. And we were just like, shit, talk about a deterrent for people. Oh, it took him 9 million. Well, I don't have that, kind of a throw the hands up kind of thing. And it really, I don't know, did it piss you off? It kind of
off. No, it really pissed me off because, and again, I really want Erin's take on this. I think it does a couple of things. One, it can give treatment centers a bad name. Mm-hmm. And I own a treatment center, so I kind of fall into that category that we just continually take people and take their money. And no, that's mm-hmm. not the case. There are treatment centers that do that, of course.
Right.
But there are so many out there that don't do that. And then I really wish he just would have never said it, because there's parents out there going, are you kidding me? We can't get our kid into one treatment center, But again, your take on this, Erin, because I'm really interested in what you have to say.
Sure. I mean, honestly, the number didn't surprise me because, when I was in early recovery, I was I went through 2 traditional rehabs, and I was in, 12-step meetings in Los Angeles, and there were a lot of celebrities in the rooms I was in then. And I think that particularly for wealthy / celebrity clients, mm-hmm. there are a lot of predatory people, in quote unquote the treatment industry or recovery industry. Sure. It is an industry, it's a business, and there are many, many good and valuable treatment centers, but because there's a lack of regulation, I think that there are a lot of people who I've seen take advantage of, particularly with celebrities, like in terms of like sober coaches and that kind of thing. And that's not to say that all sober coaches are like that. I know people who've gone on tour with sober coaches who were fantastic and really valuable to them being able to maintain sobriety. But on the flip side of that, I think that our system in general is a little bit broken, and we mm-hmm. don't, we probably have not approach things sort of like as a society from a multi-pronged effort in a way that we should have. Whereas, for many, many years, thinking was sort of like there was like this one path to recovery. And I think that what we've come to understand, anybody who works or studies, the business of recovery, that there are many, many ways to recover, and it's not going to be a one size fits all solution. And I think that as much as there are barriers in accessing care for people who have financial, cultural, socioeconomic, racial barriers to accessing treatment, on the flip side, I think that often privilege can be a double-edged sword for people who are trying to stay in recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's one of my thoughts on this, because obviously I'm in recovery. I've been to several treatment facilities in the past. And this is how we treat treatment at our facility. Mm-hmm. Our job is to get them off of the drugs and or alcohol first. Mm-hmm. That is first and foremost. That remainder of the stay, because we really push to keep that client there for the remainder of that 30 days or longer if they have that ability to pay the cash price, because insurance is not going to pay for more than 28 days period. In fact, their job now, their job now is to cut that down. So but the recovery process of, that one size doesn't fit all. You're absolutely correct. But that, in my opinion, is to be determined after they get out of that, we'll just call it the detox process. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't have too much of a problem with maybe that client coming back a second time if the first time, what we call, worked for them, but they had a slip, they want to come back, they want whatever you want to call it, a tune-up, whatever it is. I don't have a problem with that. But when treatment centers start that 3, 4, 5 times and they're charging, I'm sorry, I mean, $75,000 a month, for God's sake, 99.9% of America cannot afford that. And you're right. Our system of treatment is broken, and it's broken horribly. And I don't know how we fix that, to be honest with you.
I mean, I think a big part of it is that before somebody comes to a treatment center to detox, they need to be ready to do it. Right.
Right.
And I think that, when we look at the higher success rates of people who enter treatment vis-a-vis a harm reduction route, that's not the route for everybody, but there are higher success rates among people who whether, when I say harm reduction, that may be that they started utilizing programs where they may have accessed clean needles. Now in New York, we have safe supervised injection sites. It may be a matter of being on Suboxone, or, people still use methadone as well. My point being that I think that there may be some steps that need to happen before they're sent directly to treatment. And I think that's particularly true when we looked at treating unhoused people. That's a big issue, in California. It's a big issue in New York City. And I think that, the expectations that you're going to send an unhoused, even if we had the resources to send somebody without any sort of support system to treatment, and then they're just going to be released and be able to function, is ridiculous. Right. We really need to establish like a reconnection to housing stability and community stability before they're going to be able to successfully go through a treatment program. Based on what I have seen. I worked with unhoused transition age youth for a few years. I've do a lot of work in the harm reduction community in terms of like lobbying and I used to work in harm reduction. So from my own personal experience and from what the data shows, I think that we need to readjust our expectations of when somebody's ready. As much as I think it's great that drug court has been a diversion program for folks rather than going to jail, I don't know how successful they've been because of the requirements based on, like abstinence. And there was an article, I believe it was in the New York Times earlier this year. There's a judge in New Mexico who oversees one of the drug court programs there. And he started a sort of like a shift in that program. Abstinence it's a goal. It's not a requirement. So that if somebody they still are tested, but if they've slipped, if they've relapsed while they're in the program, they're not kicked out of the program.
Mm-hmm.
They are kept in the program as long as they sort of keep moving through their appointments. They're not kicked out of the program. And the goal is really a little bit more holistic in terms of helping them reestablish themselves within the community beyond just abstinence. And I think that's really important. We all know that most of us, when we were drinking or using drugs, there was so much disconnection from ourselves, from our communities. And that was often a goal. It was for me when it's been almost 20 years of sustained recovery. And I thrive on those connections now. Those are integral to my survival, to my happiness, to my quality of life. And everybody should have the same opportunities to have a quality of life by not being sort of ostracized from those paths because they've slipped, or because maybe they're not ready for complete abstinence. Maybe they need to, make their way through medicated assisted treatment first. I think those are a lot of the sort of things that I'm seeing. And there's a shift there. There's a shift within the industry to recognizing that. And I think it's vital. And I think that's where granted, there's very few people who have $9 million of disposable income. But even if you look at it like sort of like a lesser scale, I think that you're not going to have to go through the 10 rehabs to get it if you sort of have that path set up so that when somebody enters treatment, they're really ready.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's really meeting them where they're at.
Yes, that's what harm reduction is, right? It's about reducing harm. That's all it is. Like, no judgment on where they're at. Right. And I think that's so important because I know, I think we all can relate to that feeling of just not feeling like a human being, and maybe sometimes
or not feeling understood, you know. And again, that goes back to society not understanding addiction.
Mm-hmm.
That is my new movement. Okay. Mm-hmm. Going into 2023 is wherever I speak, I start out with, you have to start to at least try to understand addiction. You have to try to understand what I'm telling you about the addict's brain, about how we think, where our minds are going with this thing. And you have to understand the chemical makeup of these substances that we're putting in our body, because sometimes you just can't stop. So on that harm reduction side, and I am for harm reduction. Jason kind of knows where I'm going with this, but again, in America, we either go far to the left or far to the right. In all of our decisions, we never seem to have a type of balance in anything that we do. It's either all balls to the wall or not at all. And with harm reduction, just like Brock was saying the other day, they're giving clean needles, they're giving Narcan, and sometimes they're not even putting Narcan in these kits. They're not providing any resource material in these kits for people. They're just giving them clean needles. They're giving them, maybe some Narcan, and hey, good luck to you, kind of a thing.
I mean, that really hasn't been my experience with harm reduction organizations. I can't speak to every single one, but the ones that I've been affiliated with or that I've had contact with, a big part of it when I worked in harm reduction in Los Angeles, a big part of it was, again, it's reducing harm. So we had kits that would keep them from spreading disease.
Right.
Information about other services they could access if they were interested in them. And with the supervised injection sites in New York, the first in the country, they have been very successful in terms of getting people to access other services that lead them toward recovery. And they've only been here for like a year. I think it's vital that when we look at harm reduction, again, it goes back to that basic tenet of we want to keep people alive. They're not going to recover if they're dead. Mm-hmm. That is the bottom line. And it's important, not even if you don't care about that person who's suffering with addiction, it matters from an economic standpoint. If you look at the data of the cost, the trickle-down cost of the overdose epidemic in this country, it's not just affecting the person who passes away. The economic ramifications of that person dying from a drug overdose and what that does to their family, what that does to their children, what that does to their community, and the economic cost of that, it makes no sense that we're not putting money toward support systems that include fentanyl testing strips and naloxone. I have a teenager, he's 19, he's in college. When he was 17, he started, I've had drug talks with him for years, but one of the things I made him do before he went to college was to take a naloxone training program, which was in the city of New York, does a free training program, and they give you naloxone and they don't give you fentanyl testing strips, but I bought a huge amount of them. He has them in his apartment. I'm like, just put some in your backpack. And he's like, Mom, he doesn't use drugs, but I'm not naive. Most people try substances at some point in college, especially. And even if it's not him, it could be for somebody else. At one point earlier this year, 40% of the Molly in New York City had fentanyl in it. So almost half of it, right? So he was going to a party one night and said, so-and-so is going to take Molly. And I said, if you decide that you're going to take it, this is just promise me that you will test it. I said, you can go on YouTube and see exactly how much to scrape off to test it. And it's not like, that's not me saying, oh yes, I think you should go do it. I want to give him all the information that's just neutral information. This is neutral information. If you make that decision, this is what you can do to prevent death. Yeah. And I think it's that serious. And I think that, we're so far past this idea that we're going to talk our kids out of doing drugs. That's not to say that the things that we do as parents and as communities aren't preventative, because they are. But part of drug prevention is arming them with a sense of self-efficacy. And that's what neutral information does.
Sure. Yeah. And you've opened up a can here. Okay.
I know.
All right. Because I just want to say a couple of things and please, get your butt jumped in here. Would you please?
I will. I'm taking it in.
Okay. When do we talk about abstinence? Mm-hmm. What is wrong with abstinence? And again,
there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that, I don't think we should assign a value to it, because
I agree.
Because here's the thing. I know people who got sober in the late 90s and then I relapsed a few more times, but they were sober for X amount of years. And then they decided to smoke pot, and they smoke pot occasionally and their life hasn't fallen apart. To me, that's not like, oh, they left 12 steps and their life has gone to hell.
I agree.
I don't care. Like, if somebody's recovery is about getting back your life. It's not about recovery. Doesn't mean abstinence. It means recovering, right? It's a process of getting back your life. So if somebody is has a quality of life, is able to function and all that, I don't care if they stay on Suboxone the rest of their life. I don't care if they smoke pot. I don't care if they drink. It's none of my business. It has nothing to do with my recovery. And I think that because historically the thinking is that abstinence is the only answer. And while that may be true for many people, I don't think it's true for everybody. And I that's not to encourage people not to be abstinent, but I think that we need to look at it again more holistically. The goal is having somebody with a quality of life, functioning in society, able to work, have a family, enjoy life.
But I just want to touch on the methadone situation for a second, because it took me 2 years to get off of that crap. And when you're dealing with methadone, this is the one topic that I just am not going to budge on at all. When it comes to methadone, I think methadone is the world's worst drug out there. It is so much worse than any other narcotic that's out there, legal or illegal. When you are taking methadone, unless it's the 60-year-old and above street person that has nowhere else to go, that is going to keep them off the needles, going to keep them off fentanyl, then I have no problem with that person being on methadone. But when you are a 25-year-old male or female and you are strapped to methadone, you can only get it from the clinic that you originally go to. You cannot leave your city, forget your methadone, and walk into another city and get your dose for the day. So if you forget it, you are in big trouble, because you are going to start to go through withdrawal symptoms. And those are the worst withdrawal symptoms in the world by far, bar none. So again, I believe my responsibility is to tell people that. If you want to even go with Suboxone, I don't have too much of a problem with that, but long-term, you're going to be strapped to it. You can't, you can go places, you can take it with you, but what if you forget it? What if you're somewhere and you can't get it? You are totally screwed. You're going to get as sick can be, and then everything turns to shit. Now you have that chance of going out and picking up fentanyl, heroin, pills, whatever it is, because the last thing we want to be is dope sick. That's kind of my take on that. So as a treatment facility, we use Suboxone because I do think it is a fantastic drug for detoxing purposes. But we try to do it depending on their use and all of that. There's a lot of ifs that go into that. It can we can detox for 7 days, 10 days, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it takes with the person. But I'll tell you what, when the reality is, if you are strapped to some of those things, that's just it. You're strapped to it. Mm-hmm. It's tough to break free of that stuff.
New Perceptions North, the premier drug and alcohol treatment and recovery center in Central California. A full continuum of medically supervised, top-quality care with programs for detox, inpatient residential treatment with dual diagnosis, intensive outpatient treatment, sober living, support groups, and more. With 50-plus years of combined experience and sobriety, Flindt, Andersen, and Thelma Gatlin Wilson provide adult men and women with the highest caliber of professional health care, treating each client with compassion and respect, and a safe, comfortable environment to begin the process of recovery. To proudly create and sustain a life without addiction, call 559-978-1507 or visit newperceptionsnorth.com.
Yeah, I was never on methadone. There's a lot of negative aspects of people being on methadone just physically, right?
Sure.
Just what it does to people's teeth and your bodies and whatnot. I was never on methadone. I detoxed. The last time I detoxed was over the course of 7 days with the care of a doctor using Suboxone. It was a game changer for me. At the time, it wasn't called Suboxone. It was just buprenorphine. But
right.
I think there's two things. I do know people who were and remained abstinent and have been abstinent for 25 years and did so with a methadone taper program. I think methadone is not an ideal drug. They unfortunately for people without insurance or with poor insurance, that's sometimes the only option.
Sure.
I'm a huge advocate of whatever the medicated assisted treatment is, even methadone. I'm a huge advocate of changing the way that the system works, because I agree it's impossible, especially, there was, years ago, an article in the New York Times, methadone every morning. And it's like, it's the hour, 2 hours of getting there in the morning to get their doses for the day and then go to work. And that's not a very realistic way for somebody to live. During the pandemic, there were a lot of programs that piloted people being able to access their medicated assisted treatment and take home doses. And there was no increase. There was actually a decrease in people either misusing their take home medication or relapsing on the medication. And I think that says something, again, like I avoided methadone for a reason. I was way more afraid of methadone than I was heroin. You know, and obviously like then like I didn't have fentanyl to deal with in the drug supply. But I think that in terms of drugs like Suboxone, my gosh, I've just, it makes a huge difference. I've seen it for people.
Sure.
It wouldn't have been a solution for me to stay on it long term, but I know people who have been on it long term, and I you know, if that's the alternative, for if it's either that or them going back to their drug of choice, I think that's the better of the two options.
I agree.
I'm not, you know, it's that thing of like, is it ideal? Do I think they'd be better off not being on anything? Of course. But again, you know, I know there's a woman that I met through like a speaking engagement who is a stay-at-home mom who became addicted to pain medication after a C-section, and then you know was like doing the doctor shopping and all that stuff, and has been on Suboxone I don't even know how long, a long time now, years. And I mean, again, like that wouldn't be a solution for me, but she has a happy functioning life, and I don't know that it's our place to judge whether or not that's right for them. So for me, the answer is really about increasing access for it to the people who need it. And I think always encouraging people to find another path, right? Because it's always going to be uncomfortable when you take all of those substances away.
Yep.
Our neural pathways are so screwed up. But the good news is that your your brain is so elastic that we do retrain those neural pathways. It's why, you know, I speak to parents. I've spoken to several parents this year who lost children to fentanyl overdoses. And some of them had substance use issues and some of them didn't. But one of the things that I've seen in terms of the data, especially with treating adolescents, is that more important for that age group than rehab is cognitive behavioral training. They have really high success rates with the DBT because they're doing sort of this group. They have the group. They're, you know, the group that they meet with in addition to to their regular appointments with the therapist, and the combination of those two things. That's what retrains your neural pathways, is cognitive behavioral therapy. And I think it's, so I'm so sorry about this drilling. I don't know if you can hear it.
No, you're good.
I think that you know, the goal should be to be off of substances to do that, because I do think that those substances get in the way of us being able to do it. But there might be some people that just aren't going to be capable of doing it for whatever reason. And I would rather see them alive than dead. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, the most disheartening thing, and as you pointed out in your article, talking about 2021, 107,000 Americans died by drug overdose, the number one cause of accidental death. And to me, I get that we had a pandemic. I'm not making light of anybody that, you know, long-term effects died, you know, whatever it is. But this is what pisses me off, is why isn't this talked about more? We just had midterm elections, not a single politician. Right. You know, we fought here with, remind me, Jim.
Assemblyman Patterson.
Yeah, Jim Patterson here finally got a bill passed in California. Gavin Newsom waited till the last second to sign it, signed it. Yeah, don't
even get us started on that one.
I'm sorry. Part of my life, I'm still fucking amazed that my fellow Californians reelected the guy.
Yep.
Anyways, 3 to 5 million. I mean, that's a fraction of a dent in this huge state with what it is and how it's affecting. And I'm glad that you're bringing in a different perspective with harm reduction, because of what we're seeing is very much we're doing something when they're really not doing anything.
Oh, they're not, because it's not, again, as you know, it's not about like, that's one prong of it, right? Like, again, it's like, okay, let's keep people alive. A big part of this that people don't want to look at, or when I say people, I guess I mean politicians, is, you know, what you did see leading up to the midterm elections was so much talk about fentanyl from both parties. Oh, it should be a weapon of mass destruction. We should label it a weapon of mass destruction. This is an extension of our failed drug policies. The war on drugs is why we have fentanyl flooding the drug supply right now. And I know that there's so many talking points about, oh, it's, you know, it's because of our borders. Bullshit. I'm sorry. I don't know.
You can say whatever you want.
Complete BS. You know, the fact that fentanyl has flooded the drug supply, and that's not just opiates, right, is because it's much less risky to import the components that make synthetic, black market fentanyl than it is to the risks of like an agricultural crop like cocaine or heroin traditionally, right? So I'm not talking about the dealers here. They're at the bottom of the scale. Like going after them is pointless.
Right.
Going after the main suppliers, right? The risk that they take on in managing crops and then making the drugs and then getting them into this country, that's way more risk than being able to package in other little packages really tiny amounts of these different chemicals to make fentanyl. You know, it's like there's so much wrong targeting when it comes to our drug policy. You know, the DEA is going to punish a pharmacy because they wrote out too many Suboxone prescriptions, but we have people dying left and right. So we're not going to make that available to people. But then we also want to tell everybody that there's fentanyl in your Halloween candy, which is the most ridiculous, like false news stories that circulated in October. This idea that drug dealers were making rainbow colored fentanyl in order to like get kids addicted. Like, it's insanity. It's complete insanity. And it's the same sort of insanity that pushed our war on drugs policy in, you know, from the 60s on up, you know, 70s and 80s on up. We're not looking at what the root cause here is, right? So
but we're also we're not attacking this in the right way. I work with DEA, I work with a lot of these people, okay, and the fact is, Jason knows I have this saying: when you're fighting a dragon, you don't cut off the tail, you cut off the head. And the bottom line here is that,
well, what do you think? What's the head then?
The head are whether it's the cartels, it's China, the ones that are manufacturing this stuff.
That's not the head. I'll tell you. You know what the head is? The head is that we have very failed support systems, because we could cut off all the supply in the world. That's not the issue. There will always find another way to get supply in.
I agree with you.
The problem is that people take drugs because our society is sick. When we don't take care of the sickest person, we are just as sick as they are. That's,
Of course, but there's two sides to that, though, Erin. There is that side. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. But the other side of that coin is we still have people shipping that shit into us. Okay. Yeah. And you have to go after somebody here.
It's a waste of time.
I don't think so.
Disagree.
I don't, because I agree with you that going after the small time drug dealer, yes, I think that is a waste of time. But when we are allowing this crap, okay, to from wherever it is, China, to be shipped into Mexico, from Mexico to get it over our borders, you bet your ass there is a time when we have to stand up and say, guess what, guys, enough. There are two sides of this that we have to try and somehow solve. And one is that, and the other is our society. All right. And the fact that we are never going to truly win the war on drugs, but we can definitely put a dent in it if we wanted to. And I just don't think we want to. I think politicians are using this as another platform to keep running, to keep getting elected over and over again. And they don't do shit in this thing. They just don't do shit. But again, our treatment system is so broken here. I mean, I'm going to be long gone before that thing even begins, all right, to get better. I think we all are going to be long gone. We are not making any steps towards repairing the treatment industry. We're not making any advancement in working with insurance companies. Insurance companies are one of the in my opinion, are criminal in not allowing us to do our jobs. This thing is broken in 18 different ways.
Oh, I agree. It's broken in 18 different ways because, I mean, it goes back. Our entire healthcare system has nothing to do with keeping people healthy, right? I mean, that's a big part of the problem. And, I think that the sort of fundamental way that things are going to change is that they need to change before somebody gets to the point that they're turning to drugs.
Sure.
Every single person who turns to drugs does so because it's a coping mechanism.
Absolutely.
It's a maladaptive coping mechanism. The drugs and alcohol aren't the trauma. There is a trauma underneath that. And
I agree.
I say this, I said this in my book. I've said this to people, and sometimes people look at me like I'm crazy. Heroin saved my life. I would have killed myself if I had not found heroin at 13.
I understand. Okay. That.
That's not that I'm not suggesting that as an idea for people who have suicidal ideation. But the point being is that, we aren't raising kids with the tools, largely because most of us don't have them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really, really where it starts is, because I was a kid who started using really young, I talked to parents a lot. I talked to kids a lot. And a big part of this is that we don't start talking to kids about drugs early, because the talks about drugs happen before we ever mention the word drugs.
That's
because
right.
That drug prevention starts with giving our kids self-efficacy, giving our kids tools, and modeling emotional regulation. How many adults do you know, like they may have never had a drug problem, have a terrible time with emotional regulation?
A lot.
Right? So many. Like, what do you think road rage is? Like, there's so many ways, right? You look at just the way people are over politics on Twitter, the way that like people will get riled up at like a rally and turn racist. I mean, like these are all people who have really poor emotional regulation. And I think it's something that doesn't just start, it's not just about parents, it's also about the way that we educate, the way our education system. I mean, it feels like a 10-headed beast, right? And it is.
It is.
But I don't feel hopeless about it.
Well, let me tell you another piece that's seriously broken here. All right. And again, I agree with you on the education piece of this. Right. But the biggest broken piece in most of this stuff is our school districts. They are not allowing, this, they are not allowing us in to tell the truth about this stuff. They don't want to spend, they want to spend the money on Red Ribbon Week. They want to spend the money on the DARE program. Those things don't have a goddamn thing to do with anything. They do not matter. Every statistic tells you that they do not have an effect. I talk to speakers all across the country here, all right? And not every school district, but most of them are telling all of us to soften our message. We can't come in there and we can't talk about the real truth on what is going on with this. We can't get parents in the room to even sit there and listen. This is one of the biggest problems that we're facing.
I think a lot of people want to just treat life, and I kind of have a struggle with this, even with my own children, with some stuff, is that life is going to be good for them if we give them rainbows and butterflies and give them self-esteem, which 3 people here know, shit, I had to earn that thing. And it's still work daily because it's not always there. It's a thing in flux. It's not just something like, look, I got self-esteem. Yay.
Right.
Doesn't work that way. But I think it's a lot of the painting, the sunshine and rainbows, as opposed to really giving, like you said, tools. Like, my kids are aware. These are the things that work for me.
I got one kid that resists meditation and all these different things. Well, hey, they work for me. This is the best I can do, is help you with the tools that I have. You might have some different ones. And so I think it's just really disheartening. Like Flindt was saying, we go into these schools and they want to present it like it's sunshine and rainbows, and you come in once and you present a nice little soft message and everybody's going to be great. And that's not the way it works, especially when so many of these students are going home and they're getting the trauma buzz, and that's where it's coming from.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like
I mean, it's, you know, it's all like the behavior is not the wound. It's the reaction to the wound, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No,
it was for me.
Yeah. Look, there's the three of us sitting here. We all had trauma, and whatever that trauma is, it was traumatic to us. Sometimes trauma doesn't even have to be evil. You know, it could be something as simple as a girlfriend breaking up with you, and your first girlfriend, or losing your mother. I mean,
truthfully, you know, I don't know. I think we may have talked about this the last time I was on. You know, Gabor Mate talks, you know, he's done a lot of really informative work about trauma and about treating addiction and the ways in which we approach it. And one of the things that I think is really vital that he says, and it may initially sound distressing, but I think that we need to look at it differently, is that it's impossible to raise a child in this world without trauma. So I don't think that there's anybody. I think it's impossible to grow up in the world that we have and not experience trauma just based on what's happening in the world. Yeah, How do you, you know, like you see everything. There are times that, and I have the privilege of doing this, that I have to turn off the news because it's so distressing that I don't even know how to process it. Right. So how does a 5-year-old that passes by the news, and like, you know, not to become political, but like, you know, with the president we had before this one, like some of the ways that it became acceptable to speak were traumatizing to kids, that you could make fun of somebody for having a disability, or say that people who wanted, you know, people who were at a KKK rally some of them were good people. I mean, like there's a distressing environment that has been amplified obviously by technology. And I don't hate technology. There's a lot of amazing things about technology and the ways that it can connect us. But I think that there is just a constant onslaught of like negativity and punching down. And it became, you know, more and more acceptable from the president on down. And I find it distressing. I talk to kids and they find it distressing. And I cannot imagine, you know, I have a 5-year-old and a 19-year-old, and I have to put those sort of blinders on sometimes and just keep doing the work and having hope, because otherwise, like, I just want to like lay down and be like, what's the point? You know, so I can only imagine how hard it is for a young person now.
Oh yeah.
You know, and we had breaks from it growing up. I didn't, you know, I mean, the internet came about like, well, I mean, I was in high school, but I didn't really have my first access was like AOL chat rooms, you know, and I was like, you know, in early college. So like it was a very different time.
I agree with you. And I've had conversations with my kids, and my girlfriend and I talk about this, is, you know, trauma is inevitable in some way, shape, or form. Like Flindt said, it could be as much as the girl that you were in love with breaks up with you. Did I ever tell you that story or something? You nailed that one on the head. High school sweetheart cheated on me. You know, I was like, but it's inevitable. But like you said, we have to have better tools with these traumas. They're going to come. How are we going to cope with it? Not only cope with it, but be able to take a look at it, extrapolate, and decide that we're not going to let us go down that path. We're going to go that other path with it. Yeah. Because, I mean, you know, you've written a book. He needs to write a book. People have told me, you know, our stories connect with people, and, you know, they can help others to go, oh, they went through something similar. well, they got on the other side, so can I. It's a lot for me. It was a lot of reframing, a lot of different things. And like you nailed earlier on, once that sense of community was there, that changed my life tremendously.
You bet. That sense of community is just, I don't care where you're at in your recovery, whether you're in the beginning, in the middle, in the end. I mean, 21 years later, my community is the most important thing to me. It truly is. And now it's just ingrained in me. That, Erin, there's a lot of times I wish I could do my I Dream a Genie move and just fast forward everybody, 20, 30 years ahead. So they can have what we have. Again, that doesn't mean that I'm cured. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. But what it's telling other people is that, this does take work. Okay. Treatment, however you want to go about it, that's okay. But there's a rainbow at the end. Okay. If you can hang on and just work, and it's hard work. Okay. That's the other thing we have to tell these kids. If you go down this path, this is not an easy path. Recovery is hard. It's changing so many things about us that we maybe don't want to change. But I'll tell you what, if you can get there, man, I'll tell you what, there's nothing better in the world to me than sobriety right now. Nothing. I wouldn't be here.
I think that for a lot of people, I don't know if I mean, it's definitely, it's not an easy process, but I think that sort of like it's that thing of like, you're ready to change when it becomes too painful not to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, the importance, even, and part of with the article, while Matthew Perry's story may be very different than most people's because of his fame and because of his money, at the end of the day, it's valuable because people will listen to him, right? And I think that the reason that there's such an appetite, not just from people who've experienced addiction, but part of why there's an appetite for addiction memoirs in general is that, we're looking to see a reflection, right? And I think that that's what's important. And I think that as much as I wrote my book for people who were struggling, I think maybe even more, I wrote it for people who didn't really understand addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And the number one comment I've received from people has been from people who haven't struggled with addiction, and that they were shocked at how much they related to
Right.
in terms of about sort of like what's happening inside, like sort of that inner dialogue and the things that like I was struggling with. And maybe they didn't reach for substances as a solution, but they understood it so much more because they could kind of see how that could happen. Right. Because that's sort of like the overarching message. Addiction is not a moral failure. It's a public health issue. And it's when you're looking at addiction, you're looking at a human being struggling with a very human condition.
Yes.
And I think that's sort of like the takeaway that I want to bring for people, and that I think is important in what we're doing right now, talking about it, and anybody who writes about it, advocates, speaks about it. It's really about increasing empathy and compassion and seeing that this is not about this is not a sense of that somebody is a moral failure,
right? Because
they struggle with addiction.
Yeah,
it's never a moral failure, ever. I'm sorry. It's just not. I've heard that for so many years, not from vast amounts of people, but there are people out there that think that that's just what we are. We're just drug addicts. We're pieces of shit. However they want to describe us. And the reality is, for those that are in recovery, I'll tell you what, I've never met finer people in my entire life. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that.
Yeah.
I will go to my grave with that statement.
Well, yeah, I think that anybody who has gone through that sort of level of physical, mental, existential, psychic trauma and struggle, you're forced to evolve or die.
Right.
So I think that sometimes for people who haven't gone through that, they've been able to skate by without looking inward and facing parts of themselves that may be hard to accept. And I think that anyone who's in long-term recovery to some degree, maybe some, there's plenty of people I've met in recovery that I didn't care for either. but
I can raise my hand.
They're humans, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But I think that, I feel somebody had asked me recently, like what I thought bravery was. And they're like, because they said, you're so brave to have written this book and And I think that when I, like earlier on in my recovery, when I started sharing my story, I thought that like bravery and like courage meant like telling the truth. And I totally have changed that. Not that it, doesn't take any courage to tell the truth, but I think that like sort of the real bravery and the real power, like our own personal power, comes from accepting the truth. And that means like accepting who we are, even the parts of us that we don't like. And that doesn't mean that we don't strive to change them, but accepting who we are and where we are, and accepting who other people are and where they are.
Yeah.
And when I see people, addict or not, when I see people really like struggling in life, regardless of what their situation is, I think it always comes back to that. Like they are not in acceptance of how things are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's that rigorous honesty is one of the things that can hang many people up. And we all have those moments, and it's not like I said, it's not a constant thing. Not at every moment am I rigorously honest. I want to blame this, that, and then I go, oh shit, I have a huge part in this, and, or then break it down and go, wow, this was all me and my thinking.
Right.
I got to adjust that real quick, or whatever it may be. But and when I brought up community, I don't just mean for the addict. I mean for everyone in general. It makes me think Flindt and I kind of, he won't tout it, but we each kind of have an adopted transient, so to speak. And, Flint's try to give him clothing. I have a gentleman that he doesn't remember me, but every time, hey, Arthur, how's it going? What, can I get you Gatorade? There's something, it's to me disheartening that we lose that humanity for everybody. Again, to meet them where they're at.
Right. It's just kindness, right? I mean, it's like, regardless of whatever choices people have made in life and whether or not they were even choices, every person deserves kindness and compassion and shelter and food.
Yeah.
And I think that, I remember a couple of years ago, I saw this Facebook post where somebody talked about like this unhoused person that they came across, and that, that they bought them food and then talked to them. And the bot, it was like this like very heartfelt post. And at the bottom, they said, not every homeless person is a drug addict. And it really pissed me off. And I ended up writing an article about it because you know what? I don't care if you're actively shooting drugs, you still deserve my kindness. And like, if I have it, like I'll give somebody money when I have it. And it's not my business. If you give somebody something, it's not your business how it's spent, what they do with it. You're just showing them a kindness. And there's no, this idea that some people deserve help and some people don't is complete BS. Like everybody deserves that help. And I think that our goal should be doing what we can to make it as easy as possible for people to reach out for that help.
Yeah. It reminds me of a situation here. And it's funny to me in retrospect, and I like to end at least with a little laugh. Hopefully we all get a chuckle. As a buddy of mine goes, geez, that bum needs to get a fucking job. And I'll leave his name out. And I went, I don't think his resume is quite in order. Like maybe just today, a hi. Hey, do you need something to
How
drink?
are you? Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say, add this to that is that, having worked with that population, it's the amount of things that people don't consider. Like, I'd work with these kids who they didn't have an ID. In order to get services, they had to have an ID. So we had to find their birth certificate. They might not even have known where they were born. I mean, the amount of things that you have to go through and then the waiting to get the things, It's
maddening.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely maddening. This young guy that's out in our parking lot, I think about him all the time. And the sad piece is, he's got such mental health issues that he cannot even, I mean, Erin, when you see this young man, I've looked in his eyes, and he's got these beautiful blue eyes, but he's so filthy dirty that I try to look past that, into that face of his. But he cannot even, I mean, it's pouring rain the other day. I'm not trying to blow my own horn here, but I
brought it up. It's fine.
I carry clothes in the back of my car, back of my truck. So when I see him, I'm going to continue to offer him to him, because this kid is standing out there with torn pants, no socks, shoes that look like they've already walked 80,000 miles. And he cannot comprehend the fact that I want to give him something to wear. He goes, no, he literally says, no, thank you. I don't need it.
Right.
When he's in rags. I mean, one of these days I'm just going to tackle his ass, and I'm going to put the clothes on him. I don't know. But it's some people need our kindness. They need our help. Absolutely.
Because I tell you, like, I mean, all of us probably have those memories of like when we weren't in great shape, and there was a kindness that somebody showed us, and we remember those, and I never experienced homelessness,
right.
And I can only imagine just sort of the level of trauma just associated with experiencing that.
Oh, goodness gracious.
What a conversation.
I always get emotional, like right at the end.
But the good news is that I'll just add this quickly before we end, is that I have seen people recover who nobody thought would recover.
You bet.
I've seen people who were celebrities, who had a lot of money, who were like, oh, they're for sure going to die because look at how they're going and they have endless money and and they recovered. I've seen people who were homeless and had mental health issues, and nobody ever thought that they would get it together. And they couch surfed and went to 12-step meetings and stayed in recovery. There is, as long as people are alive, there is always hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've had friends from the penthouse to the jailhouse and
to the
back
house.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. So, Erin, if people want to find out more about you, your book, I mean, you write for so many different periodicals. So, how can they connect with you?
I'm just my name at Erin Khar on all social media. I have a Substack where I have my advice column, Ask Erin, which I've been doing for 12 years. Oh my gosh, 12 years. And my website's just erinkhar.com. Awesome. I'm not hard to find.
That's Khar too for people.
Khar, yeah.
And we'll put the links in the podcast description. Mr. Andersen.
Yeah, Erin, thank you for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I love the conversation back and forth.
Me too.
You know what? You're doing great stuff. And again, just thank you. We'll definitely be in touch because we want to do these again. You bet.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call Parents and Addicts in Need at 559-579-1551 or check us out online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media at Pain Nonprofit. Please subscribe to the podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. To donate, please click the link in the description and help us save more lives gripped by addiction.
This podcast contains the views and opinions of hosts and their guests to the show. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each person is sharing their unique perspective, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast and website are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. Privacy is of the utmost importance to us. For those wishing anonymity, people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect confidentiality at the request of certain guests. This website or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient relationship. If you find any errors in any of the content of this podcast or blogs, please send a message through the contact page.